I just want to introduce to you Maria and Albert Zakharovi from Lviv in Ukraine. They're graphic designers, WCCM Oblates and national coordinators of Ukraine. They have been instrumental in developing the Ukrainian meditation communities over the past 10 years with a focus on contemplative Christian tradition and interfaith theology. Before the Russian attack on Ukraine, for many years they had tried to establish a friendly relation between the spiritual seekers of both countries through the help of meditation. Maria and Albert.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi.
Dear friends, we welcome everyone who decided to join our meeting today. We are Maria and Albert, the national coordinators of the Ukrainian part of our community. And you know, this meeting, we think it's very important in this time of crisis. The main thing now is the communication that is born in the shared experience of silence. Today, we have many crises around the world. They're all intertwined and interconnected, maybe like everything in the world. For our part, we can talk about the experience of life and meditation precisely in the crisis of war. Here in Ukraine, where the Russian army continues to destroy cities and people for the third year already, and also both Ukrainians and its own citizens. There is a dark power of illusion of self-centeredness. It simultaneously destroys everything around it and itself as well. In a certain sense, this is a manifestation of that consciousness, which can be called absolutely opposite to the consciousness of the community, the unifying consciousness about which we as a whole community were thinking in the first year of this war. These reflections helped us a lot at the beginning of this crisis. They reveal to us the transformative work of the Spirit that takes place in each meditator and in the meditative community. And now we would like, together with all of you, in meditation and communication, to expand the space of this action of the Spirit in us, so that it can thoroughly change our vision of reality. Changing our vision is a chance to change our world, which is really nothing more than a community space. But this community has not yet been born. In our view, all our terrible crises are a painful process of birth of what must become a community of all humanity without borders. This is what the mystics call the new creation. But all creation begins in silence. The world is created from nothing. Fullness is hidden in emptiness. So let's open this meeting with a moment of silence. Instead of timer's bell, we suggest now listening to the sound that we in Ukraine has been listening to for 3 years, the sound of an air raid siren. On the other hand, it is the sound of death and destruction, but our attention, which is God's gift and through prayer, can turn illusion into reality, darkness into light, and death into life. Let this silence be an expression of our compassion for all those who died in this war and in all other wars. And let it help us to see light where it is now, and to see light where now it's very dark.
So we have 1 minute of silence. Отже, цю зустріч ми готували разом з Анилою, що живе у спільноті Бонво та є чудовим медитатором та другом нашої української спільноти.
Uh, we prepared this meeting together with Anela, who lives in Bonvo community and is a wonderful meditator and friend of the Ukrainian community.
Саме вона запропонувала цю назву «Любов під час війни».
It was she who suggested this title, Love During the War.
Як пізніше буде казати отець Анастасій, головне під час кризи не втратити глибинної здатності, яка робить нас одночасно людяними та божественними істотами.
As Father Anastasi will say later, the most important thing during a crisis is not to lose this deep ability that makes us human and divine beings at the same time.
У загальному це любов, але з практичної точки зору все починається з пробудження нашої здатності бачити красу. Бачити її не тільки у тому, що є гарним, але у всьому взагалі.
In general, this is love, but from the practical point of view, it all begins with the awakening of our ability to see beauty, to see it not only in what is beautiful, but in everything.
Ми відкриємо наші сьогоднішні роздуми коротенькою розповіддю про цікавий містичний досвід, який став для нас початком зцілення у цій травмі війни, яка досі триває.
We will open our reflections today with an account of an interesting mystical experience that was the beginning of healing for us in this ongoing trauma of war.
У третій день війни ми вперше почули сирену повітряної тривоги.
On the third day of war, we heard this air raid siren for the first time.
Цей звук має спонукати бігти до укриття.
The sound should prompt you to run for cover.
Натомість нас обох потягнуло зреагувати протилежним чином. Ми вибігли на балкон.
Instead, we were tempted to react in a completely opposite way. For example, to run out onto our balcony.
Nіколи так не робіть.
Don't do it, never.
Холодне повітря перехопило подих, була зима.
The cold air took our breath away because it was winter time.
Над нашою головою висіло низьке похмуре небо та кружляв невагомий сніг, мов попіл.
Overhead, a low, gloomy sky hung, and wetly snow swirled like ashes.
Весь простір пронизував цей надпотужний звук сирени.
And the whole space was pierced by this powerful sound of siren.
Він поступово набирав висоту, проходячи по всьому частотному спектру, і знов спадав вниз.
It gradually gained high, passing through the entire frequency spectrum, and then fell back down.
З невеликою затримкою увімкнулася ще одна сирена десь далі.
With a slight delay, another siren went off, somewhere further away.
Потім ще одна у центрі міста.
Then another one, probably somewhere in the city center.
Багатоголосся сирен охоплювало все більший і більший простір, не залишаючи нашої увазі шансів вислизнути від щасливої ясності цього моменту.
The polyphony of sirens covered more and more space, leaving no chance to escape the terrifying clarity of the moment.
Океан сирен вібрував і поширювався, затоплюючи свідомість все більше.
The ocean of sirens vibrated and spread, flooding the consciousness more and more.
У цьому океані було потрібно відповісти на запитання і негайно стати кимось, або переляканою твариною, або тим, хто здатен бачити красу.
And in this ocean, it was necessary to answer the question and immediately become someone, either a frightened being or someone who is able to feel beauty.
Сирена – це вісник смерті, і вона є жахливою.
The siren, that harbinger of death, is terrifying.
Але ця мить уваги змусила нас відкинути усі побоювання нашого его і побачити красу цього хору сирен.
But this moment of attention made us put aside all the fears of our ego and see the beauty of the chorus of sirens.
Повірте, звучання сирен повітряної тривоги може бути неймовірно гармонійним. Ви зараз це чули.
Believe me, the sound of air raid alarm sirens can be incredibly harmonious, and you just heard it.
Воно нагадує про смертність вашого тіла.
It reminds you of the mortality of our body,
Але бачення його краси пробуджує в нас те, що неможливо зруйнувати.
but seeing its beauty awakens in you something that cannot be destroyed.
І, напевно, саме це ми маємо побачити, дивлячись на розп'яття Ісуса з Назарету очами споглядальника.
Surely this is exactly what we should see looking at the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth with the eyes of a beholder.
Бачачи це розп'яття тими очами, якими побачив старця, хворого, труп та аскета, історичний Гаутама Будда.
And we can see the same eyes with which the historical Gautama Buddha saw the old man, the sick one, and the corpse, and the ascetic person. As we listened to the sirens, we realized how much meditation can prepare our attention to hear more than a signal of danger. This art of being stable and calm teaches us to see our existence as a subtle and organic process. God is a goal of this process, and all things and events are the gateway to the transformation of the human and to the divine. By allowing daily meditation to transform our attention into a more masterful and creative one, we enter into the experience of crisis, such as crisis of war, as a gateway to transformation. On the other side, all ordinary things, all people, evil people, good people, and all the events form a mysterious unit of growth for us. A sign of this is the light of beauty that shines even in the most terrible, and it does not remove any of our current problems, but it gives hope for a solution in a better future, which starts now.
Добре,
Well,
ми переходимо до наступної частини нашої зустрічі.
we will move forward to the next part of our meeting, and it would be this short film about our Ukrainian young meditators. Now we will share with you this small video with some words of these Ukrainian young meditators. Sincerely, I want to say we have much more witnesses and words, but we just not have many time today for this film. That is why maybe later we will share with you on some other meetings the second part of this film. And now you can just hear some of them. Life is unpredictable. There are times of adversity and times of prosperity. But the unity of life is beyond duality. Any time of our life is a time for meditation. Now we will hear authentic voice of people living their lives in Ukraine during the war. Some of them are experienced meditators, and some have just now discovered the power of meditation in these difficult times.
Я Іра, медитатор зі Львова, а це мій товариш і медитатор Кіт Шломо. Наші імена означають мир, від слова шалом, але ми живемо тут в часи війни. І медитувати в час війни, медитувати в темний час – це бути вірним тому, що ти обрав раніше. Це плекати частинку людяності і краси тому просторі, який для тебе є можливим. І іноді це виглядає як робити кроки назустріч невідомому. І іноді це просто провалюватися в провалля, як в сніг. Ти можеш бачити тільки на ту частинку, яку ти ступаєш зараз. Дуже маленький крок, дуже повільно. Але зберігати вірність те, що ти обрав раніше, це дуже важливо. Бо коли ти йдеш без надії, коли ти не бачиш сонця, важливо просто йти в напрямку сонця, в напрямку миру, в напрямку істини. І ділити цей простір з іншими – це теж дуже велика цінність, яку ми пізнали. Бо наші друзі зі всього світу медитують разом з нами і створюють разом цей простір людяності, простір миру, простір, який є над те, що ми переживаємо тут зараз, попри війну, попри біль, попри ненависть, попри так багато речей, які ділять. Ми можемо зберігати це найкраще і найглибше, що є в нас, те, що нас єднає.
Всім привіт! Мене звати Денис. Я з невеликого міста Кам'янець-Подільський. Працюю в величезній корпорації в відділі маркетингу. Мій досвід був наступним. Якось деякий час тому назад зі мною трапилася ось яка історія. Я опинився в горах. Це був похід, і після дводенного переходу ми нарешті на заході сонця піднялися на височезний гірський хребет. І встали там, почали дивитися. Ніби весь світ він лежав перед ногами. Було так добре, спокійно, тепло. Але я постарався прислухатись до себе. У мене страшенно билося серце, мені було неспокійно. Я не міг навіть якось стояти. Чому? У мене в голові новини, бомбардування, не знаю, шахеди і вся наша реальність, яка відбувається. Я подумав, ну я же тут, в горах. Я дивлюся на гарний краєвид. Чому я про це думаю? Що воно мені дає? Тільки тривогу. Я нервуюся. Для чого? І це настільки було складне питання, що я просто закрив очі і почав прислухатися до вітру. Ніби я і є вітер. Він просто шумить, він просто існує. І це стало настільки спокійно, настільки добре. У мене якось прийшли до ладу думки. І через деякий час я зрозумів, може це і є воно. Той спосіб зупинитися, вийти із хаосу і бути собою, дати собі можливість відпочити від того. Чому це важливо? Це неймовірно важливо, бо кожному з нас треба робити свою роботу як найкращим чином, яким ми можемо. Робити це у стані стресу – це не найкращий вихід, знаходячись у стані спокою. Це спосіб продовжувати робити те, що я роблю, приносити користь там, де я є. Тому і є мій сенс і досвід медитації. Дякую.
Привіт всім! Мене звати Христя. Я народилася і живу у Львові. Війна, вона торкнулася мого серця в той спосіб, що мій рідний дядько загинув на війні. Йому дрон влучив в ногу, коли він рятував своїх товаришів. І, на жаль, ця рана була смертельна і його врятувати не вдалося. Медитацією я почала займатися відносно недавно, тому я в цьому новачок. Але Я якраз дізналася про медитацію в такий час, коли мої відносини з Богом зайшли в глухий кут. І відкрила для себе нове поле, новий простір для зустрічі з ним. І медитація для мене це зустріч з Богом. Це зустріч з Творцем, де ти не мусиш нічого робити, ти не мусиш нічого говорити, ти не мусиш запитувати. Ти можеш просто бути з ним, просто бути в його присутності. І практично нічого не треба робити. І для мене це такий вихід з того глухого кута, в який я зайшла.
Доброго дня, мене звати Василь, я екскурсовод у місті Львів. Зі спільнотою медитації я приблизно 5 років. Стосовно самої медитації, під час війни особливо, то вона якось допомагає заспокоїтись, заземлитися. І дуже важливо це відчуття спільноти, яка, власне кажучи, є, якихось хороших людей, які є поруч, в разі чого підтримують і якось допоможуть. І загалом така спільність, скажімо так.
Всім привіт! Мене звуть Назар, я живу в місті Львові, сам з України. Працюю в ресторанній сфері, кухар-кондитер. Зараз переживаємо такий час хаосу, час війни. І моє місце сили – це є медитація. Так, медитація – це для мене найперша зустріч з Господом Богом, Ісусом Христом. Це роздуми над Словом Божим. Навіть більше додав над словом сили. Тому що я приходжу сюди різний, бо перебуваючи в цих подіях, які зараз відбуваються в Україні, вони сіють в моє серце, як і в кожну людину. Це смуток, розчарування, гнів, більше навіть ненависть. Але приходячи на медитацію, приходячи на цю зустріч, цю спільноту, я знаходжу тут силу це все перемагати. Навіть більше мені появляється ця сила, яка це перемагає і перетворює весь цей бруд, цей хаос, який відбувається, в Божу силу Духа Святого. І я можу далі йти в світ і дарувати людям цю справжню Божу любов, яку заповів мені Небесний Бог, Небесний Отець. Бог, який нас всіх любить. Навіть попри це все, що відбувається зараз в наш час. Всім дякую.
Дякуємо, дорогі друзі, за вашу увагу.
Thank you, dear friends, for your attention.
Ми сподіваємось, що фільм вам сподобався.
We hope you liked this little film.
Процес його створення був дуже спонтанним, дуже щирим.
The process of creation of this film was very spontaneous and very sincere.
Навіть я зараз, передивляючись його наново,
And even me, when I see it again,
відчув дуже багато емоцій.
feel a lot of emotions.
Сподіваюсь, що це був добрий спосіб для вас поспілкуватися з цими людьми.
I believe that it was a great possibility for you to have a little conversation with all these people.
І, будь ласка, якщо ви зможете, поставте лайк під цим відео.
And if you can just like this video on YouTube for the development of our Ukrainian community
Це
here.
допоможе іншим людям побачити.
It would
Світ
help
всім.
to see this film to many other people.
Дякуємо.
Thank you.
I'd now like to introduce to you all Father Anastasi Danilevsky, who is staying here with us in Bombo for a little while. Father Anastasi is an Orthodox priest from the Ukraine and a WCCM oblate. During his talk, Father Anastasi will share with us some reflections born during the last meetings of the meditation group he led in the Ukrainian city of Kherson as it was being occupied by the Russian army. Father Anastasi.
Yes, thank you. Сердечно вітаю дорогу моєму серцю спільноту, моїх братів і сестер з Бонво та всіх, хто зараз присутній у цій зустрічі онлайн. Я хочу подякувати за запрошення сюди, за можливість провести цей час з вами у рефлексії і спогляданні. Бути тут у єдності із всіма вами, це для мене означає бути разом із Христом та разом з отцем Джоном Мейном, а також із всіма, хто йде шляхом медитації. Ця зустріч для мене – це радісна можливість поділитися пригодами мого власного життя. І перш ніж я детально розповідатиму про те, що саме підштовхнуло мене підготувати бесіду на таку делікатну тему, як досвід медитації у стражданнях війни, хвороб та інших людських криз, я хочу пригадати деякі події, які стали передумовою. А я розпочну із спогадів. Із спогадів мого святкування Різдва 2022 року. Це час, коли до початку війни, повномасштабної війни, лишалося 2 місяці. Тоді ми всі в українській спільноті ще не усвідомлювали, що саме на нас очікує. А в житті проповідника трапляються моменти, коли першим здивованим слухачем проповіді є сам проповідник. І от пригадую, тоді я відслужив різдвяну святкову літургію у невеличкому селі біля Херсону. Зараз це село досі перебуває в окупації. Я спілкувався так з невеликою православною спільнотою, складалося буквально з 4 осіб. І під час проповіді я говорив, що події Різдва повторюються у житті кожної людини, і Господь допомагає нам знову і знову переживати події вже свого Різдва. Різдво – це в першу чергу не про солодощі і шопінг, ванілі з корицею. Ми маємо бути готовими відчути Різдво як реальну подію у своєму житті. А в реальності Різдва Ісус, Марія і Йосип були біженцями. І вони тікали від спроб їх убити. Я пам'ятаю, як вимовляючи слова «біженці», я відчув у глибині серця надзвичайне хвилювання. Водоспад емоцій обрушився на мене, коли я сам почув свої слова про те, що Господь дозволяє людям пережити досвід біженця. Тому що це теж є частиною Його досвіду. Досвіду, який є одночасно божественним і людським. Для таких людей, що стали біженцями, це розуміння може стати чи не єдиною підтримкою у випробуваннях. Час минув, а слова, які пролунали тоді, ми маємо бути готовими, виявилися пророчими. Я досі бачу очі людей з того села, повні туги. Це українці, що стали заручниками війни та окупації. Я дуже вдячний вам за те, що ви пам'ятаєте про них у молитві. А 2022 рік йшов далі, і за січнем прийшов місяць лютий. Війну я зустрів в Херсоні. Перші бомбардування російської армії я проспав. Мене розбудив дзвінок Марії зі Львова, яка присутня разом з нами зараз онлайн. Марія сказала мені, що почалася повномасштабна війна, і Росія напала на Україну. Страшні вибухи спорожніли місто, черги за необхідними речами. Це вже було схоже на страшний сон. Був зруйнований звичний графік повсякденного життя та служінь. Втратилась можливість вільного і безпроблемного пересування за межі окупованої території. Звісно, війна вдарила і по зустрічам нашої медитативної групи. Ми продовжували збиратися в 3, іноді в 4, і готувалися до Великого Пасхального посту. У цей великопосний час, після кожної медитації, ми тоді розважали над уривками із книги «Буття». І дивним чином ці роздуми співпали із темою, яку запропонував отець Лоренс для спільноти, для роздумів у цьому 2024 році. Краса творіння, що являє Божу премудрість. Ми відчували тиск війни, страх окупації, мали сильні побутові проблеми. І спільна медитація стала важливою допомогою для нас. Вона дійсно допомагала здолати випробування. На працю споглядання нашої групи, на жаль, довелося перервати через руйнівну працю, яку робила війна. Коли я, перебуваючи у Херсоні, готувався до поїздки сюди, я слухав щоденні вибухи на вулицях цього спорожнілого міста. А медитатори нашої групи вже тривалий час не збиралися на спільну практику. Хтось попав у жахливий полон до росіян і досі там перебуває. А хтось став біженцем, втратив усе майно та рідний дім і блукає по світу. Але шлях споглядання і є шляхом миру та надії, а не шляхом ілюзій. І про це нам нагадував отець Лоренс під час свого недавнього візиту до Львова. В нашій спільноті ми разом медитуємо і очима споглядальників читаємо чудові містичні тексти. На досвіді ми знаємо, що вони можуть відкрити нам відповіді на складні запитання і підтримувати нас у складні часи. Ми, медитуючи, стаємо свідками мудрості Творця Всесвіту. Ми стаємо споглядальниками, що відкриті на досвід дії Бога в іншій людині. Тому сьогодні я від усього серця дякую за можливість поділитися із вами хлібом біженця. Це хліб, що тримав в руках Ной, коли сидів у ковчезі порятунку і очікував на припинення дощу. Це хліб, який руки Йосипа дбайливо поклали із собою в дорогу, коли він виїжджав до Єгипту із Марією та Ісусом. Це хліб життя і надії, якою житиму я, повернувшись в Україну до наших медитаторів, які продовжують медитувати під час війни, шукаючи надію та допомагаючи одне одному. Отже, я запрошую вас пройти той шлях, який у тиші спільної медитації пройшли ми з учасниками медитативної групи у Херсоні на початку 2022 року. Під час того, як місто вже було окуповано російською армією. І ми зануримося у шестиднев, який читали кожної зустрічі після медитації. Існує думка, що авторство Моїсея – це шана традиції іудаїзму для цієї книги. Но сьогодні ми розуміємо, що важливі духовні послання передавалися із вуст в уста. І записані вони були набагато пізніше. Але для нас, людей, що слідують шляхом медитації, немає занадто турбувати питання авторства. Дійсно важливо те, що певні частини Писання, наприклад, псалми, шестидення, історії Моїсея, Ноя і Авраама – це тексти настільки фундаментальні, давні, глибокі та важливі для духовного досвіду, що вони спонукають до діалогу та рефлексії навіть тих людей, чиї дороги протягом історії розбігалися в різні боки. Я маю на увазі 3 основні гілки авраамічної традиції книги і откровення – юдаїзм, християнство та іслам. Я хотів би звернути вашу увагу на те, як універсальність цих текстів висвітлює головні цінності християнської медитації і взагалі досвіду споглядальної молитви. І я запрошую вас уважно вдивитися в глибину текстів шестидення та історію Ноя. Отже, Божественне Слово звертається до нас, кажучи: на початку створив Бог небо і землю. Земля ж була пуста і порожня, та й темрява була над безоднею, а Дух Божий ширяв над водами. Глибокий і змістовний початок текста книги, що на івриті називається Берешіт, розповідає нам, що Творець усього буття бачить повноту у пустоті та в порожнечі. Так само говорили і мудреці Індії в Упанішадах. Порожнеча є повнотою, а повнота є порожнечею. Що це означає для нас практично? Творець своєю присутністю і своєю силою наповнює весь простір. Цей простір на івриті називається словом «ола», що означає мир, всесвіт, сфера буття. Для людини, що має духовний шлях та перебуває у внутрішній молитві, у молитві серця, це розуміння є вкрай дуже важливим, тому що воно спрямовує її духовну практику у правильному керунку від поверхні до глибини, до внутрішнього виміру. Бог – це центр життя, джерело усіх сенсів та стратегій, що формують творіння. Все, що є реальним і що наповнене Богом, і Богом твориться, стає вельми добрим. На перші рядки книги Берешит було написано велику кількість чудових коментарів відомими містиками. Напевне, будь-яка звичайна людина, що практикує глибоку молитву та споглядання, теж відчуває захоплення і зворушення, коли в її особистій щоденній практиці та в ній самій особисто народжується все те, про що розповідає цей текст. Увага та довіра до всього живого. І навпаки, якщо людина ще не переживала подібного досвіду, напевне, вона може доторкнутися до цього, подивившись на сторінки книги буття, очами споглядання, у світлі медитації, відкриваючи глибоку радість через усвідомлення того, що її глибинне «я» присутнє у цьому світі. Можна прожити ціле життя і жодного разу не звернути увагу на його глибину та внутрішній зміст. Тоді в нас будуть домінувати страх і втома. І це сумно. Але замість цього людина може широко, із щедрістю і великодушно відкритися задуму Творця. Коли це відбувається, людина відчуває, як її внутрішній простір наповнюється світлом. І в ній з'являються нові питання. І пошуки та її внутрішній порожнечі несподівано проявляються знаки та символи живої присутності того, хто є джерелом життя. Люди, які мають досвід медитації, саме переживають це. Древні мудреці Елади та Риму вважали, що кожна людина є образом Всесвіту, мікрокосмосом, і вона повинна наповнена творчим змістом, аналогічним тому великому Всесвіту. Творець наповнює життя зовнішнім та внутрішнім змістом, роблячи ці протилежні рівні подібними. Бачення людини як мікрокосмоса Всесвіту властиве усім культурам, як Заходу, так і Сходу. У Індії є чудова історія про божество Ганеша, яка розповідає нам про єдність зовнішнього і внутрішнього буття. Історія розповідає про отця-правителя, божество Шива, який каже своїм синам, що передасть трон тому із них, хто першим обійде Всесвіт і повернеться. Брат Ганеша відправився у подорож негайно, а Ганеша чинить інакше. Він обходить по колу трон, на якому сидить його отець, і каже: «Ти, отець, і є мій Всесвіт». Душа людини, що перебуває у стані чистої молитви, радісно усвідомлює своє божественне походження і те, що її буття глибоко взаємопов'язане із Творцем та зі всім творінням, що нас оточує. Споглядаючи світ та спостерігаючи за закономірностями процесів у ньому, людина усвідомлює, що її внутрішній світ створений з такою ж мудрою послідовністю. Внутрішня будова людини, гармонія духа, душі та тіла відзеркалюють гармонію усіх процесів, що формують наш світ. І мені дуже близький вислів патріарха Константинополя Варфоломія, який назвав людину саме священником творіння, що звершує священну дію у світі, який є даром Творця. Ще на початку свого монашого шляху на горі Афон патріарх Варфоломій на особистому досвіді пізнав мистецтво споглядальної традиції ісіхазму і вже тоді збагнув, що внутрішнє очищення серця і повне віддання себе волі та баченню Небесного Отця, який нас любить, є джерелом будь-яких зовнішніх дій і турботи про світ. І ще одним важливим знаком перебування Творця у глибинах процесу творіння є протяжність того, що твориться. Бо динаміка процесу творіння об'єднує час та простір історії в одне ціле. І ця єдність творіння стає іконою духовної подорожі людини. Послідовність дня творіння є образом цінності та єдності всього зітвореного. Шестидення, звісно, не є підручником з природознавства. Радше це поема про внутрішній сенс, який Творець вкладає у творіння. Писання вчить, що світ є проявом творчості Бога, а людина має божественне походження та духовний шлях. Дивотворіння є зернятком, народженим згори і вкладеним у наше серце, щоб ми про нього дбали. Такі образи, як, наприклад, світила на тверді небесній, не вказують на фізичні об'єкти, але на те, що вище начало перебуває над усім, що живе та дихає. І ці образи вчать нас у молитві споглядати внутрішню сутність світу. Вони описують той простір, де відбувається наше з вами становлення, зростання і дозрівання. Отже, занурюючись глибше у тканину тексту шестидення, ми спостерігаємо, як Бог поступово наповнює землю всім необхідним для її існування. Творець являє себе як першу і необхідну умову існування світу. Великий арабський філософ, теолог і медик Авіценна мав цю інтуїцію, називаючи Творця необхідно суще. І ця основа творіння, цей дух творіння, поступово відкриваються нам у спогляданні. Отже, початком і основою творіння є Божа присутність. Наступною важливою умовою функціонування світу є наявність екосистем, які забезпечують впорядкованість функцій життя і проявляють мудрість Творця. У світі не існує нічого зайвого. Все є невід'ємною частиною єдності буття. І все, що є реальним, є нашим багатством. Так само і все, що наповнює внутрішній світ людини. Все це є частинами однієї гармонійної цілісності. А цілісність людини поетично описується словами молитви, яку православна церква читає при здійсненні таїнства хрещення. Послухайте. Боже, владика наш, своїм образом ти звеличив людину і впорядкував її. З'єднав душу розумну та прекрасне тіло, так, щоби тіло служило душі. Тіло увінчав головою і в неї вмістив різноманітність почуттів, які не перешкоджають одне одному. Ти покрив голову волоссям так, щоб захистити її від змін у повітрі. Всі частини тіла добре з'єднав, щоб усіма ними людина складала подяку тобі, премудрому Творцеві. На цьому ми зробимо паузу та продовжимо нашу мандрівку вже після обіднього часу. Щиро дякую. Thank you very much.
Maybe I just going to find Lawrence.
Said he'd want to speak.
Oh. Thank you, Father Anastasi. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, we will hear more from Father Anastasi this afternoon.
I think the camera is out.
So let's just take some moments of quiet and let what we have heard so far this morning sink in. So if I may now introduce Lawrence Freeman. Lawrence is a monk of the Benedictine Congregation of Monte Oliveto, and he is the director of Bonvo, where we are speaking from, and he is the director of the World Community for Christian Meditation. Lawrence, our teacher, our friend, and our brother. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. Thank you very much. Thank you, Father Anastasi. And thank you all for joining us today in our solidarity with Ukraine, and a solidarity that I think is made more real by a deep reflection on the issues, the human issues, the spiritual truths which we are confronting and encountering in this time of huge turmoil and this time of war. So Father Anastasi reminded us of the bread of life and hope, as he called it, which is to be found in Scripture, in a wise understanding of creation, looking at the world and seeing it as a shining, effulgent expression of the divine, not just as something that needs to be exploited. And also in the work of contemplation itself. In the miracle of life, in other words, the miracle of life that brings together so many dimensions of our humanity and brings us into an experience of the fullness of our humanity. So, Maria and Albert played us the air raid sirens from Lviv, which are part of the life of Ukrainians now. On my first visit to Ukraine, when we arrived at the hotel, the air raid sirens went off, and we were very nervous about it, just arriving in the early evening. But everyone in the hotel just shrugged their shoulders and said, well, it's nothing. But now, more and more, of course, it is something, and it does signify, it signifies this, the continuity and the obstinacy of this dark time and dark energy. And as I listened to those air raid sirens, I thought they sounded like human voices, actually. It sounded like lamentation. And there's a tradition in some cultures of exactly that kind of, it's called keening in Ireland, where usually women lament with these high-pitched wails, really, of grief and sorrow at the pain and the wound of loss. Losses that last for a lifetime. And everything that is happening in Ukraine, everything that happens in Gaza, everything that happens in Sudan, wherever there is war, there are wounds that are inflicted upon ordinary people that last for a lifetime, long after the politicians have finished their game and called for at least a temporary peace. But that's the most grievous thing that we lose in a time of war is our humanity. And we get a glimpse of this in our ordinary daily lives when we give way to violence, emotional violence, verbal violence, in an argument with the people we're living with or even the people we love. And we release the capacity for violence in us. And as we do that, we know that we are changing. We know that we are becoming less than human. And there is a deep shame and nausea, really, about that when we see it in ourselves. But imagine that scaled up onto the level of war. And of course, the only way that can be sustained is by denial, a denial of the dehumanizing power of violence. This is the other cost of a war of aggression, the dehumanizing. But it's the possible dehumanizing of both the aggressor and the victim. And this is why, in a time of war, we have to keep our attention on the good, on the goodness of human nature, on that capacity for transcendence in human nature, and of the love that is at the core of human nature. Because if we lose that awareness, and we get simply caught up in the dark forces of aggression, and even defending ourselves, as we have a right to do, against the aggressor, the risk is that we become like our enemy. And if we become like our enemy, if an aggressive enemy, then the bread of life and hope becomes very stale, and we descend into deeper and longer suffering. So violence of any kind is a failure of hope. It means we don't believe that there is an alternative. And I'm not just talking about geopolitics and the big wars of history or the wars that are happening in many parts of the world now, but the wars that happen within ourselves, in our families, in our communities, in our relationships at work, those times where the violence can be released in us, in cruelty, in the failure to respect even those with whom we're disagreeing or those who are making us irritated and angry. This is what I mean, a failure of hope. And therefore war, aggression, violence always leads to despair, always brings us into despair. It is actually an expression of the abandonment of hope and the embracing of despair. And it's also a failure of the imagination, that we can't think of anything better. We can't think of any better way of dealing with a problem, resolving an issue, than shouting, than saying mean things to people, by conspiring against them or plotting against them or speaking about them behind their back, or by building weapons of aggression and mass destruction. So war is the unleashing of this capacity for violence that we have in ourselves. Every one of us has this capacity in ourselves. But it becomes free from constraint, and it runs out of control. This is the horror of war, and this is why when you see people, patriots with brass bands and patriotic songs, beginning a war of aggression, you can see they've already stepped over into the unreal. And then when they'll be coming back as amputees, or coming back as having seen their colleagues killed on the battlefield, and suffering post-traumatic stress, that's the reality and the price to pay for all of that illusion. And we'll have to understand also the political and social forces that bring that illusion into existence, false existence, but in existence. So we have to deeply understand and see that violence of any kind is dehumanizing. Even violence which we use to defend ourselves legitimately has the tendency to dehumanize us. We have to be deeply sensitive to that. And it is uncivilized. No group of people, no country, no tribe, no organization that uses violence, aggressive violence in this way, can cease to be dehumanized. And as I say, even those who are the victims and the defenders in war risk being dehumanized by it. So, yet war, the great evil of war, has nothing glorious about it, has nothing noble about it, is less real, less potent than the power of love. And there's a wonderful example of that, well, in many accounts of wars and the stories of war, in the autobiographies that people write about war, they often describe moments in the worst of times, when they have been lifted up into a transcendent state, aware of the beauty and the goodness of creation. The beautiful moment describing this in literature is in War and Peace, when Prince Andrei, who is a rather cynical, unhappy aristocrat, joins the Russian army in defending against Napoleon's invasion, and he's on the battlefield, and the battle is going against them, and the flag of his regiment falls on the ground, and he picks it up, and he runs crazily, self-destructively, and perhaps suicidally, towards the enemy. And he's not killed, but he's wounded, and he falls to the ground. And then when he opens his eyes, he sees what he couldn't see before. He looks up at the sky, and he says, "How quiet, how peaceful, how solemn this sky is. It's not at all like when I was running against the enemy. How was it I did not see this beautiful sky before, with the clouds moving across it, and how happy I am to have found it at last." And this experience we see in the rest of the novel transforms him. So it's an example among many of how the power of love, and I think this is an experience of divine love, coming through creation, coming through his own despair at that moment, but how the power of love simply overrides and transcends even the terrible power of violence and war and the illusions that it creates. And Prince Andrei, at that moment, instead of trying to change the world in the way that his hero, actually Napoleon was his hero, although his enemy, like Napoleon trying to change the world, at that moment of truth and beauty, goodness and ecstatic love, he sees the world and he accepts the world as it is. And this is contemplation. And this is why we have to remember, and we have to communicate in times like ours the meaning of contemplation, not as an escape or a temporary relief from the bad news and from the suffering, or not even just as a way of coping with it, although it is, but much more than that. It is the only antidote for this dark tendency in the human being to kill, to be cruel, to reject. So, at that moment on the battlefield, that moment of grace, that moment of pure contemplation, and it shows he doesn't deserve it. We don't deserve this grace of contemplation. It's a grace. It comes to us without our having to earn it or being able to earn it. It's just given. And in that givenness of it, we see that everything is an illusion. This is what Prince Andrei saw. Everything is an illusion except what he was seeing. And the silence and the tranquility of that beauty, as he described it. And then he ends his words, thank God. So the peace of God is infinitely greater than the violence of war. And that's what we have to affirm and discover for ourselves and then share, communicate with conviction. And it's not peace as the world gives it, as Jesus said. The peace that he gives us is not the peace of the world, the result of negotiations and ceasefires and temporary truces. It is the peace that passes understanding. And he says explicitly, it is my own peace that I am giving you. Because this was the peace that he had entered into, the same peace that Prince Andrei found on the battlefield. It's there, and Jesus knew it as his Father in union with the Spirit, and breathed that into humanity. But the tendency to war in the human psyche is immense. And there is a lust for violence, just as there can be a lust for dehumanizing sex. And the tendency to war is the perverse result, and it's a deep perversion of the human. It's a result of an interaction between individuals and the population or the crowd or the mass of humanity. The Napoleon, the Hitler, and I think we have to say today, Putin, that the mass of humanity, the crowd, the populace, the electorate, is something, and it's a thing, something that certain individuals know and understand intuitively. And they know how to manipulate it. They know how to manipulate the collective moods and desires of the crowd. And he, and it's always a he in history, isn't it? He uses force to suppress the crowd, using violence of repression, just as every tyrant does, as has happened in Germany, as is happening in Russia, happening wherever there is a totalitarian, authoritarian regime. There is a repression of basic human rights. At the same time, that tyrant has the skill, the rather dark skill of being able to convince the people that he's protecting them. So the oppression of civil rights in Russia is part and parcel of the war against Ukraine. Part of the same thing. And when we become aware of the nature of that violence and how we can and how we should respond to it, we have to look deep into our own soul, into our own nature, and we have to recognize those parts of ourselves which are also corrupt, which are also have a tendency to repression or oppression or even violence. This is what Plato called the great beast, this capacity of a crowd to be manipulated and coerced and repressed. It's like a great beast. And certain individuals know how to tame a wild beast and use it. And is that wisdom? No, it's not wisdom, it's a skill. It's clever, it's a skill, but it's not wisdom. And we see it in the Nuremberg rallies. We see it wherever human beings lose their sense of what it means to be human by surrendering it to something anonymous and impersonal. And there is a kind of lust in that, an ecstasy in that as well, as you see in a football crowd. So, in the great allegory or parable of Plato, humanity is like a group of people who are tied up in a cave, and there's a fire behind them. It's casting shadows on the wall. And they take the shadows, they're all watching the shadows, and they assume the shadows are real. And then one individual breaks out of the bonds tying him there, and he goes up, he walks out of the cave, makes a long, difficult journey climbing up out of the cave into the sunlight. And the first thing he sees is the beauty of the world, not this dark, stingy, dark cave anymore, but just the beauty of trees and the beauty of nature. But then he looks up higher to the sky, like Prince Andrei, and sees the sun, the source of light. Then he comes back into the cave and says, "Hey guys, we got it wrong. These shadows on the wall are not real." And they won't listen to him. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to be disturbed. So this is the sad reality of the force of the shadow side of humanity to hold us in bondage. But it's a clue that the contemplation and this individual who's first of all could contemplate the beauty of nature, but then looked up and contemplated the sun, the source of light, the creative origin. That contemplation is the only effective counterforce to war. And therefore, as Maria and Albert said to me shortly after the war in Ukraine began, we are in a war, but now is the time to teach meditation. And working with the meditators in Ukraine, we hope to be able to just simply do that in whatever way we can, by translating, by publishing books, distributing them, by spreading the word, but most of all by meditating together. And this is the discovery in among individuals who can then be led out of a crowd, out of the beast of the crowd, where we lose our humanity, into community, into the human solid, into human unity, into human fellowship, into the body of Christ. And this is Václav Havel, who was a Buddhist, first president of post-Soviet Czech Republic, wrote a very powerful, or gave a very powerful speech, I think at his inauguration, on transcendence and the need for transcendence in the postmodern world. And the way he speaks about this transcendence is the same, rather similar to the way Simone Weil talks about the new holiness. It's something new. We are in a new world order. The old is crumbling. The election of Trump is an example of the bare survival. At least he was democratically elected. But what is he going to do with democracy? We don't know. But the old ideas, the old interpretations, and the old institutions are crumbling around us. And in that chaos, one of the first things that happens is a resurgence of nationalism. We begin to fall back into the tribal feeling, which is another beast. And that is a denial of the reality that the world is multicultural, and nothing can turn the clock back on that now. So, violence and war are the opposite of transcendence, and transcendence is what opens us to the contemplation of reality. War does not take us, the human being, beyond itself to God, to the all, to that experience that Prince Andrei had. It takes us to nothing. It takes us to nothingness, to nihilism, to mere destruction, as we see with the pictures of what does war mean? It just means the destruction. The destruction of people's homes, of beautiful buildings, of hospitals, of schools, of the whole infrastructure of civilized living, and of course the destruction of human lives. It takes us to nothing. It turns people into things. And there is no violence that does not objectify people, and turn them into things. And the worst thing we can be in that sense is a corpse. A corpse is just a human being turned into a thing. Now, these are all just ideas, but they can become insights through the work of contemplation and through the sharing of that experience with each other. The building of a contemplative community can happen in a time of war, just as it can happen in a time of grief, a time of loss as well. We discover then that we can love in war. We can receive humiliation. We can be defeated even, but we can avoid being dehumanized. We can avoid becoming like our enemy. To the tyrants, to the dictators, to the generals, war is a game, a geopolitical game, a game of a hugely inflated ego. Human lives become like toys that they're moving around on a board game. And war is designed ultimately to dehumanize and to destroy the soul of the enemy. So that's why if one is, as Ukraine is in a defensive position and with the risk of defeat, it needs it has never needed more, and we never need more, the reminder and the solidarity of a contemplative community to remind us of our humanity. It's hard to resist this force of war and violence. It's hard not to be partly dehumanized by it. It's hard not to become like our enemy. And in the Gospel, especially in the last hours of Jesus' life, we have a teaching on the possibility that can be done. We can face an overwhelming, dark, malevolent force, as Jesus did. The whole of the state, the whole of the empire of Rome and the religious institutions of his own people turned against him to destroy him and to try to dehumanize him in the eyes of the people by the way they treated him and by his death. And yet, how do we see Jesus in the midst of this war against humanity? We see him with with a peace that passes understanding, and with a truthfulness which is an expression of love. And let me just end with these words from the trial, the show trial. Tyrannical, totalitarian regimes love to put their enemies in court and put them through a show trial. It just shows how little they believe in it. But in his trial, this encounter takes place that I think speaks to us very powerfully in a time of war. The high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Jesus replied, "I've spoken openly for all the world to hear. I've always taught in the synagogue or in the temple, where all Jews congregate. I have said nothing in secret. Why are you questioning me? Question those who heard me. They know what I said." When he said this, one of the police standing near him struck him on the face. "Is that the way to answer the high priest?" he demanded. Jesus replied, if I was wrong to speak, then produce evidence to prove it. If I was right, why do you strike me? Why do you strike me? And it's this question that arises from his inner transcendence, his inner rootedness in love, and the peace beyond understanding. It's this question that at that moment of oppression rises in him as the great teaching. And it's how we can endure those forces of darkness and despair and depression without losing our humanity. In fact, there could even be opportunities to discover our humanity at a deeper level. And instead of demonizing the enemy, if we demonize the enemy, we become like the enemy. Because the enemy, the aggressive enemy, is demonizing us by turning us into things. And it's very easy for us to respond in the same way. We demonize them. But that one question of why, that is the beginning of a resistance to evil that does not allow the evil to enter into us and control us. And what lies behind this question is a recognition, even in our enemy, the recognition of the divine goodness in creation and in each human being. So we can love in the time of war, and we have to love in the time of war in order not to be dehumanized. Thank you.
Thank you, Lawrence. Let's take a moment before we go on to our next speaker. Thanks. So our next speaker is Reverend Dr. Sarah Batchelor, who's joining us from Australia. Sarah is the spiritual director of Benedictus Contemplative Church in Canberra, Australia. Benedictus is an ecumenical Christian community with a practice of silent contemplative prayer at its heart. She is the author of numerous books, including Poetica Divina, Poems to Redeem a Prose World, and A Contemplative Christianity for Our Time, which is published by Medio Media. Sarah also led the John Maynes Seminar in 2019 and is a leading teacher within the WCCM. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Michael, and hello, everyone. Good morning in your time. Love in the time of war. Maria and Albert have said that the name for this event was inspired by the title of the Gabriel Garcia Marquez novel, Love in the Time of Cholera. And I've been thinking about the nature of such times, times of plague and times of war. It strikes me that both are times of contagion, something that's always latent in the body corporate, a bacteria, a propensity to violence, is given the right conditions to reproduce itself beyond the capacity of the body to heal or contain it. In the case of cholera, it's conditions of poverty, unsafe drinking water and food. In the case of war, it's conditions of threat or perceived threat, of aggression, propaganda, and dehumanization, as Father Lawrence has just been saying. Once the infection has taken hold, it escalates. Contamination begets contamination. Violence begets violence. Fear begets fear. Enmity reproduces itself. There's no mechanism internal to the contagion of disease or war that will cause it to cease multiplying. Left to its own devices, a plague will rage until it runs out of victims to infect, and a war until it runs out of enemies to kill. So like a time of plague, a time of war is indefinitely prolonged. It's a time where any sense of security and of a future is fragile. It's a time of random, unmerited suffering, havoc, and meaningless death. It may leave in its wake the kind of trauma, the shattering of trust in life's essential goodness that diminishes the lives of persons, communities, and nations across generations. So what can it mean to speak of love in such a time? Well, to be invited to participate in this event is for me a great honour, and Maria and Albert, thank you. But it's an honour for which I feel unfit. What do I know of war, except distantly and secondhand? How may I presume to have anything to say to you? You who may have lost those you love, had your homes and hopes destroyed, or faced impossible moral choices. You who live in dread of bombardment and invasion, who have suffered or know those who've suffered torture, rape, disfigurement. And yet, You have asked me to be with you and to dare to speak of love. So let me offer what I can. At the end of the Beatitudes in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus says this, "But I say to you that listen, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you, and if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. Do to others as you would have them do to you." Well, these words are shocking at the best of times. But to hear them in the time of war, in the face of tyranny, atrocity, and systemic persecution seems almost unbearable. They seem a betrayal of the very possibility of justice and self-respect. They seem to offer a God-given license for the tyrants, colonizers, and murderers of this world to act beyond restraint, undeterred by resistance or even the attempt at self-defense. Love your enemies, Jesus says. In times of war or tyranny, what can this mean in practice, apart from quiescence, occupation, defeat? Well, everything hinges, I think, on what we mean by love. What is the love with which we are to love our enemies? What does love look like in the time of war? Well, to begin, I think it looks like heartbreak. When Jesus confronted the murderous enmity of his own city, his coming rejection by its people, he wept. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. Jesus laments for himself, realizing what Jerusalem's enmity will mean for him. And he laments for them. He sees their entrapment in the futility of fear, falsehood, and hatred. In Matthew's Gospel, he foresees the destruction to which this entrapment must lead. See, your house is left to you desolate. In Luke's version of this story, Jesus addresses the city itself. If you had only recognized on this day the things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. And the consequence of their blindness, he knows, will be disaster. Perhaps not immediately, but nevertheless, inevitably. Indeed, the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up ramparts around you and surround you and hem you in on every side. No life, no city, no community or nation can be sustained indefinitely on the back of violence and injustice. Jesus recognizes this truth even as he's about to become the victim of this very violence and injustice. Yet he speaks not in the key of revenge, but of compassion. Father, forgive them. To let our hearts break in the time of war is to feel our sorrow and anger, to lament at the waste of life inflicted by senseless violence. And it's to feel sorrow and anger for those responsible for this waste, for the stunted, wounded souls of dictators and warmongers, for the mean, ignorant and half-awake souls of those who comply willingly in the work of death, and for the fear and lack of alternative that may compel those caught despite themselves in the machinery of evil. When Jesus gazes on those who seek to silence and ultimately kill him, it's as if he sees their entrapment in futility, their fear, their closed-offness to love. And in the face of all they will do to him and to those he loves, he has compassion. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. Which does not mean he lets them off the hook. Immediately prior to commanding his disciples to love your enemies, Jesus denounces those who live without regard for others. Woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, for you will be hungry. Woe to you who live as if your fate is not bound to the fate of all. And this brings me to discern a second aspect of love in the time of war: truthfulness. Recently, I listened to an inspiring and harrowing address by Alexandra Matvichuk, winner of the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize and head of Ukraine's Center for Civil Liberties. She was talking about her work documenting the appalling atrocities committed by Russian forces in this war, of her determination that every violation of human dignity and human rights should be known, acknowledged, and the perpetrators held to account. In a culture of impunity, she said, everyone is dehumanized. Not only victims who are treated as if the destruction of their bodies, minds, and lives counts for nothing, but also perpetrators. Because unless those who have done evil are brought to realize what they have done, to know the enormity of what it means to violate another soul, then they remain forever alienated from their own humanity, forever cut off from the soul, from the whole. Theologian Rowan Williams has said that the love of God is not the bland legitimation of all we do and are. It can require a painful, costly process of facing the truth of ourselves and our actions and turning from our destructive ways. In a similar vein, the Australian philosopher Raymond Gaita writes, "If someone who has done evil is the beneficiary of a saint's love, it is a severe love. This is because it does not count as love unless it is lucid about the evil of the person's crimes and about their failure to be remorseful for them. Truthfulness, even judgment, is an aspect of love. But this is a judgment that comes not to condemn, but to save. The light of truth shines from the eyes of a saint, not to destroy the evildoer, but in hope of their restoration, that they might turn from their ways and live, as the prophet Ezekiel puts it. And yet, to hold open, or to seek to hold open this space of compassionate clear-sightedness, this desire that the wicked should turn and live, especially when we have suffered directly at their hands, is intensely painful. At times, it may feel practically impossible. There have certainly been seasons in my life when I have cursed rather than blessed those who've hurt me, hated rather than prayed for those who've abused me. And I've not suffered war and atrocity. So what then is this love that is capable of desiring the restoration, the redemption of our enemies? How may we come truly to want their good? Well, in the Christian vision, the great symbol, the great source of this quality of love is the cross. The love with which we are called to love our enemies is cruciform, a crucified love. It involves being willing to suffer for the sake of love itself, not to achieve an outcome, to attain a goal, or guarantee anything in return, but solely that we might keep loving. In practice, this requires us to absorb the pain of our heartbreak, the pain of a broken world, without lashing out towards others, without seeking to alleviate our agony by paying it forward and increasing hurt and hate. This absorption method is what Jesus is teaching, I think, when he says, if anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. I do not believe that Jesus here is forbidding all self-defense or demanding that we simply roll over passively in the face of invasion and injustice. Simply letting ourselves be destroyed. In a way, it's precisely the opposite. At the level of our being, turning the other cheek is about not letting ourselves be determined by what is done to us. Jesus is saying, do not let yourselves be turned into a reactivity. Retain your freedom to choose to be differently from those who persecute you, and discern what you are to do, how you are to respond from that place. Well, in theory, perhaps we get it, we know it. But in practice, this absorption method, this refusal to repay evil for evil, is indeed excruciating. Simone Weil wrote, "He whose soul remains ever turned toward God through the nail that pierces it, finds himself nailed to the very center of the universe." This is the true center. It is not in the middle. It is beyond space and time. It is God. And it's as we consent to be nailed to this center, Jesus reveals, that the life of God grows in us and begins to flow through us. In a dimension that does not belong to space, that is not time, that is indeed quite a different dimension, says Weil. The soul becomes rooted and grounded in God. Crucified love breaks through to the realm of grace. And here we discover that against all reason and expectation, beyond the zero-sum playbook of win, lose, and tit for tat, beyond reprisal and revenge, is a givenness and a freedom to be that none of us generates or merits, but into which all of us are invited. The Polish poet Adam Zagajewski, born in Lviv, touched on the necessity of making contact with this realm of grace in his struggle against the Soviet regime. The trick, he said, was to conquer totalitarianism in passing, on our way to greater things, lest you become defined by your opposition to it, lest you get enslaved by the fight against it. So many surrounding you did. One of the 20th century's lessons went precisely, sooner or later, you become what you fight. And so Zagajewski pointed to the abiding significance of poetry and art, even of drinking and affairs, for helping us remember the larger life for which we are made and for the sake of which we struggle. And Maria Tumakin, who is an Ukrainian Jewish Australian writer, born and raised in Kharkiv, has characterized these practices of art and play as essential, though not necessarily sufficient, inoculations against the total co-option of the soul by an oppressive regime. And from a contemplative perspective, it seems that the practice of meditation is a further essential inoculation against co-option into that dynamic of mutual enmity and hostility and endless reprisal. Like poetry, like art, like play. Meditation makes present the abiding reality of a gratuitous love, which, as John Main puts it, is the basic energy of everyone and everything. In the Gospels, it's from his realization of union with this love that Jesus could return to those who were his enemies, those who had rejected, betrayed, and killed him, breathing forgiveness and empowering them to create a new fellowship with God and with each other, a new world. But none of this is possible for us in isolation and in our own strength. We're rightly terrified of the suffering that can blight our whole lives and the sacrifices and compromises we may be called to make. Alexandra Matviachuk speaks of needing to invent collective patterns which give opportunity to transform pain into energy for life. And this brings me to a final aspect of love in the time of war: community. I suggested at the beginning that both cholera and war are a kind of contagion. Some dis-ease latent in the body corporate begins to reproduce itself beyond our capacity to heal or contain it. But if the disease is corporate and embodied, then so must be its healing. Love in the time of war is not a matter of retreating into some private spiritual seclusion, some purely inner peace, seeking God apart from the pain of the world. No, love in the time of war is necessarily a public and political act. It forges communities that witness to an alternate reality to the violent, vengeful, merciless reality that the dictator and the tyrant, the cowardly and the compliant want us to believe is the only one possible, the only reality available to us. And to keep loving in the time of war requires us to be connected to others who can help us sustain our trust in goodness, give us courage to speak, resist, and act, who can hold us when we weep and tend us when we're wounded. And it's such communities of love, communities like our community, that are needed to help inoculate every society against infection by the would-be warmongers and propagandists, whose power relies on turning us against each other, making us enemies when we could be friends.
Amen.
So heartbreak, truthfulness, suffering, grace, and community. Ultimately, the love with which we are called to love, the love that heals the world, is the same love with which God loves us. We're all conscious that since the result of the US election this week, Ukraine's peril seems even more acute. The rhetoric, the enactment of violence and dehumanization is in some quarters more emboldened than ever. We do not know what is to come. Yet, love your enemies, Jesus says. Do good to those who hate you. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. May God help us to be as we are called to be.
We have some time now before meditation at midday for questions from all of you online. Thank you for being here. You might want to share a comment or a question. You might want to ask Father Lawrence or Father Anastasi or Sarah something. Or maybe just from our small audience here in Bonvo, there may be a question. Leo is going to watch the Zoom. If you have a question, maybe you could just either write it in the chat, or you could raise your hand using the Zoom icon, so that Leo can find you and ask you to share your sound and your camera, so that you can ask your question personally. Father Anastasi is here. There's a microphone here if he needs to speak to you, to the camera. And Sarah is, of course, online in Australia. So if we have questions here, or if we have questions online. Leo, you'll let us know, I hope.
Yes, sure. Yes.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say hi to everybody because that's what I wanted to do. Nobody else is saying anything, so I hope everybody please tell me if I'm talking too much and somebody else wants a turn, because I don't want to monopolize or anything. I'm sorry for my appearance, but that's what I got. It's like early here in Ohio. So,
Okay.
hi.
Do you have any questions that you want to address to any one of the speakers?
Yeah,
It's Leo here.
how's your health, Sarah and Father? Mental, physical, etc. Joy. Oh, not that kind of question. That's too human or personal or
No,
Oh,
I think
a more
if you have
divine
any, yeah,
question?
yeah.
Okay, I'll be quiet. Leo.
No, no problem, no problem.
Okay, how do I
Uh,
mute me? Let me find my mute button.
okay. Valerie, can you make your question?
Yes. I'm wondering, how can contemplation really make such a difference? I was thinking of the example that Lawrence gave of the people trapped in the cave and wouldn't leave. And I found Sarah's, some of what she said, very, very helpful, that it's human to react and get angry, and it's important, but also the strength that we get from being part of a community and being joined with other contemplatives and people with similar outlooks. However, in light of so much evil, it seems almost like a form of passiveness, a passive reaction of not doing enough and of not bringing about change. So I'm wondering, how can that shift within us? I get that by not reacting, it can leave myself with a greater sense of peace. It is dehumanizing by reacting. However, we seem such a minority. How can we make any difference? How can we live with that? That's really my question, if that makes
Thank you,
sense.
Valerie. I don't know, Sarah, if you want to comment, or Lawrence or Maria.
Anastasia, Lawrence?
Sarah, would you like to go first?
All right, I'll have a go. Thank you, Valerie. And I guess this is the perennial question, isn't it, of the relationship between contemplation to action. And again, I feel that our friends in Ukraine may be the ones who have the deep wisdom about this. I guess that's the point I was trying to make, that this isn't about a retreat into our private world where we just kind of try and feel at peace inside ourselves and kind of block everything else out. But it is about the where may our action be sourced. And Lawrence spoke about that in relation to Jesus, that kind of sourcing of our action in, I would say part of how contemplation helps me is to allow that space between that moment where I just want to react, or I just want to rush around doing something, anything to alleviate the anxiety or the pressure or the pain. And it actually creates that little gap where I can listen a little more deeply, or respond rather than react. And then from that place, yes, of course, action then matters. Then we have to act. But there's no particular virtue in just rushing around making a mess out of our anxiety, as Thomas Merton puts it. We might end up generating more harm than good if we act unreflectively and from that space. So it's contemplation and action, but action without contemplation is kind of blind, I think, and it's superficial, and it's often more about alleviating my need than actually responding to the needs of the situation. So that would be a response.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Two thoughts come to mind to your point about, what is your point actually? Are you saying that we can end the war altogether and violence and human beings will become perfect. No, I don't think that is feasible. Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. But does it mean that therefore we just don't try, we don't do anything? I don't think that's human. I think human beings need to respond with truth where there is dishonesty, need to respond with love where there is hatred. This is what it is to be human, whether or not you win. I think there's an old Jewish saying: "You are not allowed." You're not. God does not expect you to succeed, but you are not allowed to give up. So the choice really is not: are we going to wave a magic wand and turn the world into a utopia? No. The question is, are we going to try? And the Bhagavad Gita puts it this way: our duty as human beings and our nature as human beings is to do good work, to do our work, our duty, as selflessly as we can, and then let go of the results, not being attached to the results. That's the secret. It's a secret. It's not a very well kept secret, but it's the justification, I think, for doing what you feel you should do, what we can do, what we must do, even when failure is the immediate result, whether it's the crucifixion or Dietrich Bonhoeffer being executed, or so on. So failure in the short term, measurable term, is in that sense not the way of evaluating the value of what you're doing. So having said that, I think on the other hand, we're in the 21st century, and we could make a difference on a bigger scale if we used our technology, our resources, our imagination for the good. And unfortunately, when we invent new technology, it's almost immediately turned into something destructive, negative, or corrosive, whether it's social media or the atomic energy. Nevertheless, this technology, especially the technology of communication, could make a difference if it was used well enough. I don't think it replaces what we're doing. Well, doesn't replace the importance of person-to-person, one-to-one connection. But the very fact that we're having this conversation from this particular place is a sign of that capacity to communicate on a scale that we haven't done before. And we think of technology now being used to spread false news and manipulate people or, corrupt them. But there's another way of using technology, and it doesn't replace the work of meditation, which we're going to do shortly. It doesn't replace coming together with other people to meditate, but it can spread an awareness, a consciousness, and insight that can be transformative at a local level as well. So I think we are in a new game, a new ball game, with the technological age. But I don't think the powers of light, the angelic powers, have really started to use those resources very well. And we haven't quite learnt, our churches, our parish, not all our parish churches by any means. Go to visit Ballally in Dublin and you'll see a parish church which is thriving, or go to Sarah's Benedictus church and on a Sunday and you'll see a gathering of Christians which is flourishing and transformative and so on. But generally speaking, the parish structure hasn't been transformed and is declining, merging, collapsing, and that is vital. I think the human scale, the local scale, the local community is vital, but it can be strengthened, nurtured, inspired, by Zoom, by all the technology we have. So there is that other side of the question, but I don't think success in the ordinary sense of the word is the only reason for doing the right thing.
I think we can take one more question. Jean-Christophe. Thank you, Valerie.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, good morning, everybody. I was just very much interested by what Sarah mentioned during her talk. When she raised the point, she was quoting someone, I didn't manage to write down who it was, but she was quoting, "We need collective patterns to transform pain into energy for love." Could you possibly build a little bit on that? Because I find it very interesting what potentially could be meant by these collective patterns to transform pain into energy for love.
Thanks, Jean-Christophe. It was a quote was from Alexandra Matvichuk, and I apologize for my probably terrible pronunciation of the Ukrainian name, but thanks. So I quoted her formally. She's a 2022 Nobel Peace Prize winner and a head of the Center for Civil Liberties. And I guess I was just quoting that as part of my own reflection on the significance of community or corporate, I guess corporate bodies where we are able to transform pain into energy for life. So I'm afraid I can't tell you much more about what she meant or if and how she developed that idea. It's a quote from a paper she gave, I believe, to a conference on trauma. So I can have that reference in my talk if that becomes available. But I guess what I meant was that sense that we can't. This isn't the antidote, or the kind of to face up to these dark forces, these realities of evil, this kind of massive trauma isn't about each individual just finding their own strength. It also has to be a corporate matter. And I guess Lawrence just then was speaking about the church as a potentially one body whose role is to do that. And that was certainly the case, as the church formed after Jesus' death and resurrection. But again, in practice, does it actually do that? And are there other possible forms of that? So I guess that was the context of it.
Thank you.
Okay, I think now we have some people thanking the chat. I thank you everyone that was part this first half of our event. We had a lot of words, and now we have for silence and for meditation. So somebody from Bonfo will lead us.
So the mystery of suffering, the mystery of evil, and the many questions that we cannot answer about them, do find a resolution, some kind of response, I think, in the experience of deep silence. It's not that we're running away from these controversies or these imponderable dilemmas, questions and anxieties. It's not that we're running away from them, but we are opening ourselves to a level of truth, reality within ourselves, which is also a level of reality and truth among ourselves that we share with others. And that's why, as the whole of our reflection today is pointing to this truth that love and meditation is simply a work of love, is not only possible, but it is necessary and natural at all times, in all the spectrum of human experience. And so we'll take our time for meditation now to open ourselves to that deep level of the divine love, the divine presence, to the mind of Christ, and to do that knowing that we are entering into a unity that is stronger than division, and to a peace that is deeper, stronger than violence. And we discover that at one level in ourselves, in our own nature, in our own psyche, in the work that we do in meditation. But that is also expressed at the collective level in our external lives. So we enter into a unity where inner and outer become one. Let's take a moment to prepare ourselves as we sit upright so that we can be alert and awake. Stay awake and pray. Or as the Buddha said, no one is enlightened while they are asleep. Let's be aware of our breathing, this wonderful gift of life that accompanies us. And we breathe the same air. That's why we have to keep the air fresh and clean. We breathe the same air. Let's be aware of that breath entering us, filling us with all that we need for life. And as we breathe out, we recognize that this is indeed a gift, not something we can possess. So we enter into that condition of poverty or emptiness, in which the truth becomes real and personal. Close our eyes lightly, so we're not looking outside of ourselves, nor are we looking into ourselves. We are simply waiting for the gift to see, not looking at God, not looking at ourselves, but purifying the heart so that we may see God. Relax your shoulders, relax the muscles of your face, And then silently, interiorly, we begin the work of pure attention. We take a word and repeat this word faithfully, gently throughout the time of the meditation. And the word I would recommend is the word Maranatha, come Lord, in Aramaic. But whatever word you choose, stay with that same word, lovingly, faithfully, returning to it as your thoughts, imagination, worries, anxieties distract you from it. We're making this simple, humble commitment to pure attention in the present moment. Let's begin with our opening prayer. Heavenly Father, open our hearts to the silent presence of the Spirit of your Son. Lead us into that mysterious silence where your love is revealed to all who call. Maranatha, come, Lord Jesus. Let's end with this prayer of St. Paul in the letter to the Romans. A prayer addressed to us. My friends, I implore you by God's mercy to offer your very selves to Him, the worship offered by mind and heart. Adapt yourselves no longer to the pattern of this present world, but let your minds be remade and your whole nature thus transformed. Then you will be able to discern the will of God and to know what is good, acceptable, and perfect. Mike?
Thank you, everyone. We have a break now. We're going to have some lunch and we'll come back at 2 o'clock French time. So please come, and we begin with a talk from Herman Van Rompuy, who of course was President of the European Union. So we look forward to seeing you here again at 2. Thank you.